Hi everyone. Today's episode is sure to blow your socks off. I have 3 stories that reveal fascinating information that will make you wonder if the things you know are really true. You might even reconsider everything you've ever learned. But first, please snuggle up and pull your socks up tight, then get to know that subscribe button. Thanks. Now let's get into the stories. I had an interesting encounter a few years ago. It's one of those things where you aren't entirely sure what you saw, but you have a good idea, and it keeps you up at night. I had been working as a park ranger in the Rocky Mountains. I was very passionate about the Rocky Mountains ecosystem. We had seen a ton of forest fires around this time, and it had been very dry for several years. So once a fire started, it just spread and spread. Many trees had been wiped out in recent years, and the landscape was completely charred. It had been for quite some time. It was my duty to watch over one particular area and to keep it safe. It felt like quite the reward after something so devastating had happened. I really enjoyed taking care of my area of the park. I felt like I was nursing it back to health even though I didn't have much to do with it. It was all just Mother Nature. But I was still proud. I was definitely spending a great deal of time there, and I felt like I lived in the park. I know people say you can never recognize anything in a forest, but I can say confidently that I knew my way around that forest. Maybe because some of the trees were missing, but I don't think I could have gotten lost out there. Not in my area anyway. Because of the fires, we didn't have visitors too often, but I liked to check out our progress for rehabilitation. I remember one day in August, it was very warm out. I felt like it could have been a day in July. The sun was really pounding down on my head, so I grabbed a hat. To be honest, I hated wearing hats because I didn't feel like I could be in full awareness of my surroundings. The hat felt like it restricted my sight and my hearing for some reason. So I do regret wearing it that day, but I didn't think I was going to be put into the situation that I found myself in. I remember driving around a bend and I wanted to get out and look around. Get some nice fresh air and see what things I could find growing. What I was hoping was to find some fungi. When you find fungi after a fire, it's really beautiful. The mushrooms eat away all the dead tree matter from the fire, and their warm colors just look so vibrant against the burnt black mess. There's nothing like it. It's amazing, and you get a new appreciation for the things that nature can do on its own. Anyway, I ended up finding patches of some pyrophilous fungi in different areas. That meant that the forest was healing itself, so I kept moving on. As I'm looking around then, I hear some knocking noises coming from a bit north of my location. It sounded like something knocking against wood, like wood against wood. It was a hollow sound, almost. At first I didn't really mind it, but then I heard another knock. Wildlife in this particular area would not intentionally knock on something multiple times. That was a habit common in primates, and there are no known primates in the Rockies. So I was confused, and then I heard it again. I started wondering if someone else was in the forest with me, like maybe mocking me, wanting me to be scared, but that didn't make any sense. I stood as quietly as I could. I wanted to be able to hear if something was heading in my direction, but I didn't hear footsteps, but I could definitely hear branches breaking in the distance. I couldn't tell what was making the noises, and I couldn't even really tell which direction it was coming from at that point. I just stayed still and I tried to prevent doing anything to draw attention to myself. And that's when I saw a rock fly past my head. Something was now throwing rocks at me. I looked around, and instantly my heart sank into my stomach. About a dozen yards away was a huge, towering mass. It was dark, and it appeared to be covered in dark brown fur. I could have mistaken it for a bear, but I knew it wasn't. Its arms were much longer and thinner than a bear's, and so were its legs. Its shoulders were massive, and then the thing stood straight up. It was bipedal. It seemed completely natural for it to stand that way, and it looked very much like a humanoid. It was frightening as heck. I wasn't prepared for this at all, and before I knew it, the creature disappeared into the charred landscape, like a chameleon blending into its surroundings. It had a perfect color to camouflage into the burnt remains of the forest. I watched it leave as it walked off into the distance. From that point on, anytime I went to the park, I kept my eyes peeled, wanting to be sure of that encounter. I wanted to see it for a second time. But despite my best efforts, I never did see that thing again. I have a close friend that works as a park ranger there too, and occasionally I'll ask if they had ever had any encounters or seen any strange creatures in the forest. But they always reply, "I guess I'm not as lucky as you." And I can feel that there's a bit of sarcasm there. But in a way, I do feel lucky. Don't get me wrong, what happened was frightening, but it was also very magical. It was something that really made me see life in a new way. I have a better appreciation of life and all of its secrets now. If things like what I witnessed were seen all the time, they would lose their luster a bit. It's like the first time you see mushrooms growing out of dead, burnt debris. It's amazing, and I'll treasure it. First off, I want to let you know that I'm a big fan and I've been watching your content for a while now. I've always been interested in the supernatural and in cryptid hunting. There's way more out there than the government or mainstream media wants you to know. I think my affinity for these stories began when I saw my first cryptid back in 1973. I was only 11 years old, but that day has stuck with me for my entire life. The image of the creature was burned into my mind, and I became mildly obsessed with trying to see it again. Well, now it's nearly 50 years later, and yesterday, I came into contact with this beast once again. I was born and raised in Albany, New York, and I've always been curious about nature and animals. I spent a great deal of time exploring the Albany Pine Bush Preserve. We're situated right between the Catskills and the Adirondacks, and there are tons of trails throughout the area. I'm going to start with my first interaction with the creature way back when, and then tell you all about what went down yesterday. It was the 1970s, so things were a bit more wild and free. I would spend most of my days running around with friends and my brother in the city and the surrounding suburbs. Some summers we would stay over at my aunt's house, which was just down the road from Pine Bush. The summers were amazingly fun, and we felt like we had a whole preserve to ourselves. After what we encountered, I knew that wasn't true. The most interesting part of the preserve are the sand dunes. And now we are right smack dab in the middle of upstate New York. You don't expect the soil to look like a beach. The barren sands are often going up in smoke since they're so dry and desolate, but there's a great deal of critters living in these woods, even on the dunes. So I went out exploring one day by myself because my brother was at horse camp or something. I was walking through the sandy terrain when I saw a dog on the top of a dune. I tried calling over to it, thinking it had gotten lost or away from its owner. It didn't move when I called, so I started towards it. From a distance, it looked like any old dog, maybe a greyhound or a Rottweiler, or a massive Chihuahua. It was skinny, and I could see the shadows of its ribcage sticking out from under its skin. It was blackish-brown with tall legs and a long snout, and as I walked towards it, it began to growl at me. I started to see it clearer now, and it had a scaly reptilian skin, and it was definitely not a dog. I was a scared little kid at the time, so I backed away slowly. Well, actually, I think any sane person would have done the same. And then the thing started to move towards me, and it moved low to the ground, and it stuck out this long pink tongue. I turned to run. I never looked back. I don't think it ended up chasing me, and I never saw it again. And like I said, this day stuck in my mind for the rest of my life. I told my friends and my family about what I'd seen. Nobody believed me. They thought I was making the story up for attention. I never went walking in the woods after that, but for the rest of my life, I stayed curious. In all those years, it wasn't until just yesterday that I saw it again. I was driving past the preserve on my way to make some deliveries. I work as a postman these days, and I take a few routes that take me out into the more desolate parts of the county. I was going about 65 when I spotted it, but I slowed down right away. There was a dead deer carcass on the side of the road. It had been there for at least a day. I'd seen it as I passed by the day before. It was bloated and very clearly a buck, decently sized with a pair of half-grown antlers. The creature that I saw was ripping at it, and it was barely recognizable as a deer at this point. It sunk its teeth in, and it used its long tongue to lap at the coagulated blood. It was disgusting. I looked at it in my rearview mirror, and I just could not believe it. I started to put my truck into reverse so I could get a closer look. I pulled back slowly, but the thing did not pay any attention that I was getting closer. My windows were open, the smell of rotting flesh and sewage wafted into the truck. I tried to hold my breath, but it was just a horrible smell that started to make my eyes water. It was so bad. I closed them for a moment to try to push out the tears, and when I opened them again, the creature was approaching my car. I sat there for a moment and I stared at it. It walked right towards my truck's door and sat just about 6 feet away. Now I got a really good look at the thing, and I didn't even have a chance to notice the smell because my heart was racing so fast. This thing was hideous and drooling. Its entire face and neck and chest were covered in the blood and guts of the deer. Its ears flicked back and forth, and its back arched like it was going to pounce. Once I saw that, I knew I had to get out of there. I stepped on the gas, and it started actually chasing after me. I thought maybe I could lead it into town or towards the ranger station so someone could get a photo or shoot it. I kept starting and stopping, going at about 30 miles an hour, and the thing was keeping right up with me. Eventually, another car started to come towards me, and I flashed my brights to signal them. Once the thing heard the engine of that car, it ducked back into the brush, and it was gone, and I don't think that car even got a look at it. Probably didn't even know what was going on. I hope maybe they did, though, so at least someone else will know what I'm talking about. My family is pissed that I'm back at it again with this thing, but I hope you guys will appreciate the story. Let me know what you think. Before I even saw it, I could sense that something was wrong. It was a warm, sunny day, and I had just gotten off work at the local supermarket. At the time, I lived near the city of Corvallis, Oregon, which is about an hour east of the Oregon coast. I had recently purchased a used car that I was totally excited about. I got in the car and started driving down the road towards home, but then decided I wanted to keep driving around in it for a bit. So it was about 2:30 in the afternoon when I decided to turn onto a dirt road that led towards the woods. I knew the road well and had driven on it periodically when I didn't want to head straight home. So I drove about a mile down this road until I realized that it was stupid to have brought my new-to-me car on this dirt road, so I looked for somewhere to stop and turn around. And that's when I came to an old logging trail that went off to the right. There was still plenty of daylight left, so I changed my mind about leaving and decided to just park and walk a bit on the trail to see where it went. I followed the trail for about a quarter mile or so when all of a sudden everything seemed unnaturally strange and quiet. I even stopped walking when I noticed how quiet it had become. No birds were chirping, no squirrels were running up and down the trees. Nothing at all was happening. It was dead silent. So that's when I started to get this uneasy feeling inside my gut like something was about to happen. So I decided to turn around and just head back to the car, which was still visible from where I stood, even though it was a way off in the distance. But as soon as I turned to walk back to the car, that's when I saw it. A flicker of movement off to the side. I squinted in the sunlight and looked into the trees, and there, about 20 feet away from me, standing behind a tree, was this creature with its cheek pressed against the tree trunk, looking straight at me. At first, I didn't know what the hell it was, but after staring at it for about 10 seconds or so, trying to figure it out, it dawned on me that this thing looked exactly like a Sasquatch. My first thought after realizing what it looked like was, holy shit. My heart immediately began racing, and I felt like I was going to pass out. After realizing what it was, I immediately turned around and started running back to my car as fast as I could. When I looked back over my shoulder, I was horrified to see that it was chasing me down the trail. It ran faster than anything I've ever seen. This thing moved so fast that in a matter of 10 seconds or so, it had covered the same distance that took me 30 seconds to cover. I ran as fast as I could until I reached my car, and I can only assume that it didn't actually want to catch me, or it easily would have. In fact, it was no longer in sight at this point. So once inside my car, I locked all the doors. I sat there for a few minutes trying to catch my breath and calm down from the experience. At least I felt much safer locked in the car. And then after about 5 minutes, when I finally got the courage to start the car and drive off, this creature came running out of the woods right next to where my car was parked and stopped dead in its tracks. And then it looked at me through the windshield. It stood there blocking my way for several seconds, just staring at me with its mouth wide open like it wanted to say something but couldn't speak. It looked exactly like how a gorilla looks when they have their mouths wide open, except this thing had extremely long white teeth. And it also had long black hair all over its body, including its face, which made it hard for me to tell the exact shape of its head. The hair on its head was long and stringy looking. It also had a very pronounced brow ridge that made it look even more intimidating. Its shoulders were broad and it had a very muscular body. I'm not sure how tall it was, but I would guess around 7 or 8 feet tall based on the size of its body compared to the trees around it. So after staring at me for several seconds, it just turned around and ran back into the woods, where I can only assume it lived. So after seeing this creature up close, there is no doubt in my mind whatsoever that the things people have been reporting on your website, Lilith, are indeed real. I've come to have no doubt whatsoever that this thing I saw was a genuine Bigfoot. After seeing it for myself, there's no way I could even convince myself otherwise. I mean, I've seen plenty of bears, wolves, and other animals native to the area, but none of them looked anything like this. I'm not sure if you believe me or not, but there's nothing anybody can say to make me think otherwise. This creature was real, and it was right here in my own town, which totally sucks. I'm not going to give out my real name because I don't want any trouble, but I will tell you that I'm very credible, and this is 100% the truth. I know it sounds crazy, but it is the truth. I'd be more than willing to even take a lie detector test for somebody or whatever else they would need to prove what I saw was real. But I guess that really can't happen until I feel okay enough to share my name. Thanks for listening.